So we want to welcome you really to the second of the Bristol Research Forum on Aging webinars. The forum is a collaboration between Age UK Bristol, Brunelcare and University of Bristol and UWE Bristol. My name is Gary Christopher, I'm the Aging Well lead at UWE Bristol. Today's session is going to be focused on older people's use of technology during COVID-19. We have some great speakers lined up for you. Looking at the number of you logged on, we've got a great turnout again, like we did last time. There's still people joining, so that's good. Each of the presenters will be talking for 15 minutes. I'm going to be trying to be strict with timings to ensure there's plenty of time at the end for questions. We prefer if you leave the questions until all the presenters have spoken. It just makes it easier to stick to times and so on. When you do pose a question, please can you use the chat function, because cameras and microphones are muted during the webinar.
Sorry, Gary, the question box, that's okay.
Oh, the question box, sorry, yeah. Can you pose your questions in the question box, because the microphone will be muted. Can you also, when you are posing a question, can you let us know whom the question is aimed for? You might want to ask just one person, or you might want to ask the whole panel. Just be clear about that. It will help us direct the questions. So hopefully, like I said, that all your cameras are off, all the microphones are muted. So the first speaker, I believe, we got three this afternoon. We've got Helen Manchester from Bristol. We've got Hannah from Open University, and we've also got Praminda and Alex from UWE. First speaker this afternoon is Hannah Marston. She's a research fellow at the Open University. She conducts interdisciplinary research and is currently leading the International Multi-Centre COVID-19 project, Technology, Social Connections, Loneliness and Leisure Activities. She previously led another international multi-centre project, Technology in Later Life, which is looking at the impact of technology on adults aged 17 above living in rural and urban environments. So her background is in video games and older adults' experience of game playing. And also, when possible, Hannah continues to work in this area with colleagues from both academia and industry. So Hannah will be talking today around digital technologies to support older adults and services in a pandemic. So hopefully you can see the slide. I'm going to hand over now to Hannah, and she'll be talking to you now about her research.
Thanks, Gary and Paul. Really appreciate being here today, and I hope that you all enjoy this presentation. So just a quick overview. I'm going to cover a brief background of myself, two studies that Gary has already mentioned, and then look into the future. So as Gary just mentioned, I have a background in video games as well as computer science and computing. And my PhD looked at the use of video games and playing habits of older people and was completed in 2010. I've spent time overseas in Canada and in Germany, and in the latter position I worked as a research scientist on the iStop Falls EU project. Since being back in the UK, over the last 5 years I've worked at the Open University twice, and I'm currently in my second position there. And as Gary mentioned, I'm a research fellow in the Health and Wellbeing Strategic Research Areas of PAN University Initiative, and part of our remit is to bring together colleagues from across the university who wish to conduct interdisciplinary research, as well as bring colleagues from external areas such as industry, academia, stakeholders, and the third sector. So as Gary mentioned, I previously led an international multi-centred study called the Technology in Later Life, or TIL, and this was between 2015 and 2017. And the purpose of TIL was to understand and explore what type of impact, perception and behaviour older adults aged 17 over used, why did they use them. And this came about because reading the literature 5 years ago, I kept reading how people or authors would say, oh, you know, older people would drop out, or it was very negative. and they never really explained in the respective literature what kind of ICT habits or experience those respective participants had. The field project was conducted across 2 countries, the UK and Canada, and across 4 sites: Milton Keynes, South Wales, Regina and McBride, which is about a 5-hour drive away from Prince George in northern BC. As you can see from this slide, we rolled out 2 online surveys, one for UK participants and one for Canadian participants, and that was purely because of the minor language differences. Because it was kind of pilot, we wanted to just explore what kind of ICT usage there was, and this was not externally funded, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to capture everything as best as possible, and we decided on recruiting 10 participants per site. Ethics was granted by all 4 respective institutions. The OU was the lead, and the additional institutions followed suit. Given that we were working with institutions from overseas, that too also gave an insight into different ethics committees and the expectations from them. And the data for the TIL study is kept in Canada to adhere to the ethics committee at UNBC. The all focus groups conducted across the sites, there was approximately 2 per site, consisting of 5 to 6 participants each, were audio recorded, and I recruited from Age Teens. Charles Musselwhite used some of the mailing lists accessible through the Centre for Innovative Ageing, and my colleagues in Canada, they used their own respective outlets and pathways as well. What was interesting was the ethics performer in Regina, they were not able to put up posters around campus. That wasn't allowed, whereas in the UK that is allowed, or certainly in the OU and in Swansea, I believe. So here's just an insight into some of the results. As you can see, the type of behaviour and reasons for using technology varied, but are very broad as well. Today is not the purpose to talk about TIL. This work is published and is accessible, open access, but I wanted to just show you how adults over the age of 70 across both genders were using technology in both rural and urban environments. As part of the qualitative analysis, we came across 2 primary themes: facilitators and detractors of technology use. And within these 2 primary themes, we have sub-themes, which you can see in front of you. In the following slides, I'm going to show you some quotes, kind of giving an example relating to both of these themes, just to give you an idea, because 5 years on, we're currently in a pandemic, some of these themes or the experiences of these older people are still relevant today. These are looking at participants talking about how they were learning to use technology and where in Canada or the UK how technology is used for them. You can see McBride quote 3, the participant there, rural living and technology or the internet is important to those older people, and as you can see from that particular participant, she didn't mind paying more money. From my experience of colleagues and my own in Canada, the cost of cell phones and internet charges can be more expensive in comparison to the UK. Whereas a participant from Wales in number 4, she talks about using the internet to look up health information, and she feels comfortable based on her own experiences of living overseas, accessing information online. Here we have some more quote, and here we see that participants report how they are given technology and experience technology based on their own health issues, and this is more from an intergenerational standpoint. Their children think it's a good idea that they should use technology for a just-in-case moment to ensure that their own health can be quickly looked after. Whereas in point 3, the lady in Wales, she notes that there's also a variety of different technologies. We've heard about them, we read about them, sometimes even experience them in our own day-to-day lives as well. But tractors of technology was also important as well as interesting. And what we noticed through our findings, that some of the participants, they felt that they were forced to use technology, they felt a little bit apprehensive. Their privacy was also an issue, and that was privacy was important for people living in the urban environment as opposed to those in rural communities. For those in the rural communities, for them it was more of a safety measure if they were travelling anywhere. And this too is mentioned in this sentence, but also understanding about how to learn, how to use ICT. And in point 2, quote 2, the gentleman from Milton Keynes, he talks about, changing over different technology and using the Norton antivirus software. He seems fairly confident in this to a degree, and I was the one in that focus group, and I recall this gentleman, he had experience of working in computing and the IT industry. And we've heard over the years now that technology and instructions and packaging are not becoming easier for the older person. So as Harry mentioned at the introduction, I'm also leading the Covid-19 Technology, Social Connections, Loneliness and Leisure Activities study. And this study initially was started by myself. I was just going to run it earlier back in the spring, and then colleagues of mine got in touch and asked if they too could have the survey, translate it and roll it out in their country. As you can see from the screen in front of you, we have 11 countries and 9 languages, and the consortium members, some of them I know, some of them I've got to know since April onwards this year. We are currently got a protocol paper under review, and hopefully that will be published soon, and that will explain the ethics behind it. Each site has got its own ethics approval, and given that it is COVID, they have been expedited fairly quickly as well. The Open University were expediting COVID-related research within 2 days. The online survey is based on a survey used in the TIL project. It's a lot smaller than the 80-item instrument, and it gives you an idea of the different survey sections here: demographics, leisure activities, health and well-being. So that's looking at loneliness. We've heard about support in the community, and via Facebook support groups as well, and demographics. And here you can see the various study aims to this particular project. We don't necessarily have a national emergency alert system in the UK, but my colleagues in Singapore and Spain, they do. So when they were putting through the survey for their ethics, certain questions were taken out. So looking towards the future, myself and colleagues Charles Musselwhite and Robin Hadley, we wrote back in March a blog about the use of ICT relating to the COVID pandemic. And this blog covers elements of ageing without children, communities, and organisations such as the Women's Institute. I too am a member of the WI here in Stony Stratford, and over the last few months we've been able to have our meetings via Zoom. There's been a bingo night once a month for ladies who are interested in bingo within our WI, the Stony Nightingales, but also social media groups. I recall, and I write this in the blog, we have an old hardware shop, like open all hours really. And part of another community group, but more COVID based, they put some leaflets into Odell's, and Mr. Odell was happy to support, you know, the rapid response for the community, and everybody knows that particular shop. What I also noticed for the area that I live in, there was this COVID related Facebook group, and what their members, what they started to do was have an Excel sheet, and for each street in the area there would be a point of contact. If somebody became ill, if somebody was vulnerable, they needed shopping, etc., that person could be contacted. And that's up and down the country. We've heard about it on our regional news as well. But what about the future? We know that working from home for many of us are going to be the norm. The rule of 6 has just come in yesterday, and for those with grandchildren and children who maybe live afar, I feel, as well as many others, you know, it's structure, it's routine. The Stony Nightingales WI, we have a coffee morning on a Saturday, and we've been having regular coffee morning Zoom meetings on a Saturday morning, and that just allows us all, you know, to come together, catch up with each other's activities during the week, and maybe, you know, thinking about the structure and how moving forward, we're going to be living in an agile society. From one week to the next, things are going to change, and we don't know what. And I think looking at best practice, looking at how maybe other organisations are working and implementing them as best as possible could be appropriate. None of us really know the full answers. I just want to thank you all for your time being here today, and for Gary and Paul and colleagues for the invitation. Here are some resources of interest that, you know, you might find interesting, and thank you very much.
Brilliant, thanks, Hannah. Like I said, we'll leave questions until the end, if that's okay. Now, the next presentation is a joint presentation actually between two of my colleagues at UWE, Praminda Kalerasoli and Alex Sleat. Now, Praminda is Professor of Assistive Robotics and Intelligence Healthcare Technologies at the Bristol Robotics Laboratory at UWE, and Academic Advisor at the Health Tech Hub. She has had a joint post with Designability and Assistive Technology SME and Charity located at the Royal United Hospital in Bath as Head of Electronics and Computer Systems for the past 4 years. Alex Sleat is a robotic engineer with a varied background ranging from work with autonomous underwater vehicles, sounds rather exciting, AI recommendation systems for heritage sites, to a focus over the last several years on assistive living technology. He's currently a KTP, a knowledge transfer partnership associate, working in a joint venture between Bristol Robotics Lab, Assisted Living Studio and Extracare Charitable Trust to explore the role of smart technology within the retirement village setting. So that was a bit of a mouthful. So I'm going to hand over now to the two of you. Again, you'll be speaking for 15 minutes, and then if anyone has any questions, just save them up the end.
Okay. Alex and I are going to talk about a project we've been working on for the last 2 years with Extra Care Charitable Trust, who have residential villages across the country. We have been working with Shirley Hall, who's as you can see there, who is the head of innovation and wellbeing in Extra Care. And Alex has been our smart technology specialist, the KTP associate, and myself, and we've been looking to trial a range of smart home technologies and assistive robots with residents to support their well-being. And we're going to share with you some specific examples of how, during lockdown in particular, the technology has been coming to the fore. So our work is to link in and support Extra Care's plan for how they support residents in their villages. But also, in addition to supporting their residents, they are also interested in how the technology can support the staff to better support the residents. So as part of our aims and objectives for this knowledge transfer partnership, we were looking to see what the gaps were in terms of the support that staff needed to make the best use of technology as well. So a little bit about the residential village setting. It's not a care home-like facility. What it is that residents have their own apartments, and if they like, they can buy Extra Care packages which are delivered by Extra Care. So in terms of what we do at the Bristol Robotics Lab at the University of West England, we are looking at a whole range of not just robots, but smart technology solutions to help people with supporting social isolation. We're addressing the big gap in the provision of staff support. So any given day, there is a shortage of about 110,000 social care staff. We're also looking to see how the technology can be used to support self-management of long-term conditions, and how these technologies can be used to indicate a need for early intervention, which can then help to reduce isolation. So we're looking at different approaches of combining smart technology. We like to work with off-the-shelf solutions, and our work is to see how best to integrate these and provide evidence and look at barriers and constraints to their deployment in the community and with organizations such as Extra Care. So for our project, the Knowledge Transfer Partnership, we used a mixed method approach to determine what the opportunities were. And we had 4 strands to this research. The first one, and Alex will go into a bit more detail about one of these in particular, the smart markets, was the innovation apartments. Now, this was an apartment allocated to us for the project by Extra Care at their village opposite the university, Stoke Gifford site. And we kitted one of the apartments out with a whole range of technologies, and Alex set up scenarios of use, which were then really helpful to showcase how this technology could be used in situ. We also had a volunteer resident who agreed to have and trial over the period of the project a whole range of technologies. We were also interested in getting data from smart home sensors to be able to look at patterns of behavior and changes to these as early indicators and the impact of interventions to assess that. The third strand, which Alex will tell you a little bit more about in a few minutes, was smart markets. So this is like a technology library, if you like. It has the option of enabling people to see what's available. we present these as enabler packs. So we're looking not at the deficit or disability, but we're looking at how these can help people achieve their aspirations. So you want to be able to go out more, engage with people more, exercise more, etc. And then we also looked at our assistive robots. So in developing and setting up this study, we have a number of questions, and these actually remain open. We started to explore them, and these are things that we'll come back to at the end of the talk for us all to consider, not just people who are developing the technologies, but also people who are going to be utilizing or providing support services. And so thinking about cost effectiveness, the skills needed to set up and maintain the sustainability of the solutions that we are offering is really important and should be kept high on the agenda. That's something we find that often gets missed. So everybody's looking to see what the end user experience of the technology is, but one of the things we've noticed is when you try and deploy these at scale, the main constraint and barriers are after the aftercare support, if you like, after the system's been given to the person, who is responsible for supporting them if there are updates to be done, etc. Battery changes need to be made. And then there are some other key questions regarding what the unforeseen effects of introducing these technologies are. We are very much aware of the ethical issues of introducing some of these technologies, which could make issues related to social isolation and human contact worse. So we are very mindful of ensuring we also consider how these technologies are deployed in an ethical manner. So I'm going to attempt to show you a couple of very short videos of different examples of the use of these technologies. So I'm hoping that when I play the slide, you'll be able to hear the video. Alex, you'll have to tell me if it works.
Today's news.
Can you hear it?
Here's your news.
Yep.
In Stoke Gifford Village, the following events are on today. Papercraft with Praminda. Visit £12 per session.
So just to pause there. So that was the first scene of an app that Alex developed for Alexa to be able to enable people to retrieve the activity schedule in the village. This next example shows integrating an augmented communication device for people with more severe disabilities.
Alexa, play BBC News.
Here's BBC News from TuneIn. BBC News 11 o'clock GMT. Hey Google, please remind me at 1:25 to go to lunch.
All right, I'll remind you at 1:25 p.m.
Hey Google, how old is the Queen?
Elizabeth II is 93 years old. She's 93 years old.
So like quite a few people are exploring the use of Amazon, Alexa and other digital assistants, and Alex is going to tell you a bit more about the feedback we've got from there. We were also exploring how these would work in this sort of setting, but also thinking about, with the first example, how do you integrate these technologies so that they fit into other support services that are available, and that's something that's quite important. And this last example is just a robot vacuum cleaner. And so this can provide people with a bit of independence, particularly if they've got mobility difficulties, etc., in supporting them keeping their flat clean. And now I will hand over to Alex, who will tell you a bit more about the use of telepresence robots. I will start by playing the video, Alex, if that's okay.
Yeah, not bad, thanks, Alex. Can I have my car keys back? Yes, I had a hospital appointment this morning, had that over and done with.
Okay, so over to you, Alex, to explain this further.
Okay, so all of this research was going on prior to COVID and lockdown, and then when lockdown happened, obviously the village was shut down and people weren't able to visit. So we tried to use the technology we had. For example, in this case, the telepresence robot, which, as you can see, is best described as Skype on wheels, which enables people to interact with people. And then in this example, I'm there, and I can control the robot's location from anywhere in the world that's got an internet connection. So we had these at 2 villages, Stoke Gifford, and there's another one at a village in the Midlands, and they were able to use theirs for setting up with 3 residents to communicate with family and friends on a daily basis, and then they also were looking into getting doctors to call patients via that. So this was really useful because it meant people that don't have any technology or limited technology, so maybe just a kind of traditional regular dumb phone, they were able to do video calls through it. And the extra benefit was that we found out that they actually don't need to touch the device at all. So we could drive the robot in there, start the call remotely, and that was another kind of level of safety for this. So if you can go on to the next slide, please, Praminda. And at Stoke Gifford, we decided to use the telepresence robot for exercise classes. So once lockdown had been lifted and some people were able to socially distance in the village centre, the fitness instructor was doing classes. She'd started doing them on balconies, so people could join in their rooms, and then as it escalated, but she noticed that there were a lot of people that were coming down previously that she just hadn't seen because they were in the extra shielding, which was, you know, only a month or so ago they were able to get out. So she actually took the initiative on this because she'd kind of been introduced to this technology through the project and said, is there any way we can use this? And so we did a few trials that varied. So one was with the robot in front of the fitness instructor, and then we had 3 people join in, much like a Zoom call essentially, and up to 5 people are able to view the screen of the robot, which had some varying success. They were able to see, but the sound quality wasn't great because they were actually interacting with each other, which was good from a social point of view because it meant that they could talk to each other. I think they were all friends from the class previously, but it did limit the interaction with the fitness instructor because obviously people were talking over it and there was feedback. So then we switched to sending the robot to their apartment. Someone would knock on the door, the resident would open the door, the robot gets driven in from, it was me at one of them, so I was standing, you know, like 2 meters away from the door, drove it in with an iPad, put it into place, had a bit of communication with the resident to see if it was in a good position for them. So as you can see on the right hand side, there's a picture that a resident's family member took while they were there, of them using the device, and they were able to join in, and the fitness instructor was able to show them after to the rest of the class. So there was extra kind of inclusion in that. So there's a couple of quotes there. Main one being like really impressed that they didn't need to touch anything to get it up and running, and they didn't know how to use technology. Next slide, please. So some lessons we learned were that it's useful really to understand the shortage of the skills involved. So turns out, after the fact, I wasn't aware at the time, that the robot that was at the other village, because they hadn't had kind of a technical person there, they were actually just using it as a stand and using FaceTime on it, which it provided the useful feature that they needed, but weren't using it to its full capacity. And then also how prior to lockdown people weren't very interested in it, but during and after they are more inclined to get on board. Next slide, please. So the smart markets, we had here we had a loan scheme, so it was basically a technology library, and we created enabler packs, as you can see here, one for cooking. So it wasn't around trying to sell a specific device, it was trying to sell, well, not sell because we weren't selling anything, but allowing people to get their aspirations met and their needs met through finding solutions to problems, rather than trying to say here's a smart speaker, but when people don't really know what that is. So next slide, please. So there were several people that had trials of devices, the main one being Amazon Alexa, because people have been quite interested in that one. And here's some of the feedback that we had from residents. It's like having someone else in the flat with me. Love it. I don't want to be without it now, and I want to learn more about it. Wish it could do more things like turning on the kettle. God bless Alexa, which was actually from a resident in a technology group meeting that Extracare hold, and he's one of the resident advisors for the group. And he was saying how without that during lockdown, he wouldn't really have been able to communicate with anyone as easily and as well. We also had someone using the Ring doorbell, which is a video doorbell, so you can see who's at your door before you open it. And this person uses a wheelchair and isn't very mobile otherwise. So they wanted it as a peace of mind because they felt quite vulnerable just opening the door. They've got a remote door opener, and they were saying, well, I don't want to just open the door and I don't know who's there. So that was quite useful for them. And then during lockdown, they were able to, see if someone had delivered a package, or they were able to talk to people without having to open the door, and that was quite beneficial for them. Next slide, please. So we go back to the same questions about how, if you were implementing these systems and technologies into your environment, into the wider community, how are they supported? Are they cost effective? How usable are they by people? Who's there to support them? And unforeseen effects. I've got a good anecdote today from someone I did an interview with. They were borrowing a very simple sleep support device, which you tap it and it glows on the ceiling and it pulses, and the idea is that you follow the breathing. And they're a couple, and the wife had it, and the gentleman said that one night he was gonna join in and have a go at trying it, but he then couldn't stop thinking about his breathing, and it actually made him not be able to sleep when he actually normally doesn't have a problem. So something like that, where you say, we don't know what the actual consequence of this device is. And that's it from us.
Brilliant, thanks.
Thanks,
Alex. And thanks, Praminda. So we got one more presentation this afternoon. Ironically, the session's about technology. We're having as might be predictable, technological issues. But I think they've all resolved themselves. So I'm going to introduce you now to the last speaker, which is Helen Manchester, who's a reader in digital inequalities and urban features at the University of Bristol. Helen is interested in digital exclusion, digital design, material cultures, and reimagining care. She develops methodologically innovative approaches to research in collaboration with artists, technologists, civil society organisations, and policymakers. Helen's also led a number of Research Council UK funded projects working with older people, including Tangible Memories, Community Care, Tangible Memories, Parlours of Wonder, which all sound incredibly interesting. So Helen's talk today then is technology design for older people, assumptions and questions, which is good because after your talk will be the questions. So hopefully be a nice lead in. So over to you, Helen.
Hi, can you all hear me okay? I hope so. Okay, yeah. I'm not hearing that you can't, so I'm going to carry on. So I feel a bit of a fraud in this session today because I have not been working with older people and technology during COVID. However, what Paul and I discussed was that I would bring some thoughts, some questions around ageing and technology generally, and also draw on my past research to think about how some of the technology designs we've worked on with older people and care staff might be usable and repurposable right now. So I thought we were going to be in a kind of Zoom setting, but we're not. So Paul, if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. I was going to ask you to think about what is it? Are we there? Hang on, I'll wait for it to come. Thanks. Next slide, Paul. Yeah. So I was going to ask you to type, not that one, the one before. Okay, I was going to ask you what technologies are most popularly discussed in relation to older people, and instead of typing into the chat because I can't actually see it, if you could just have a think about that for the next 10 seconds or so. It's just a way of getting you to start thinking about what kind of discourses are out there in the media and other places around older people and technology. Okay, if we could go to the next slide, Paul. So obviously, probably you would have thought about things like robots, because we've just had the presentation from Praminda and her colleague about that. Probably you would have also thought about teleconferencing, because that's being used a lot right now. But I think the fact that we all think about certain kinds of technology raises questions such as, why do we associate certain technologies with older people? Are the technologies discussed in relation to older people the same ones that they are actually using and that are embedded in their everyday lives? And also, has anything changed since the beginning of the pandemic? And if so, what has changed? So next slide, please, Paul. Okay, here's some images that we might see every day when we're looking online to try and find out or search for aging and technology. We have the kind of image of the robot as a kind of friend or a social ally for an older person. We have this really terrible image of an older person really not understanding and being called an Instagram in a kind of very, what's supposed to be a funny cartoon, I guess. And then we have the idea that older people are just quite confused when they're trying to use technologies. And I suppose if we go to the next slide, Paul, I would say that this is partly a result of some of the assumptions around ageing and technology. And I want to just try and unpick some of those a little bit now. So first of all, that kind of interventionist logic. So the idea that ageing is a target for interventions or a set of problems to be solved, and that they can be solved by technology. So technology is seen as a kind of instrument to solve all these problems of age that people are imagining. Or also, often older people are seen as needing technological innovations. And there's very often a strong and implicit relation between aging and care. So very often when technology and aging are discussed, it's discussed in relationship to care. There's also a kind of persistent belief that technology only plays an ancillary or a neutral role in the lives of other people. of older people, and that technology has not received much attention as an important factor in shaping ageing itself. So how does technology shape ageing as well as ageing shape technology? So if we can go to the next slide. Next slide, Paul. Thanks. So I think this means that we need to start asking questions really about how are we understanding technology and how are we understanding its role in ageing and for older people. And I think we need to shift from thinking about technologies as tools, as just tools and devices, to thinking about the practices and activities that surround them, the meanings that people attach to them, and the social relations and structures that these technologies are linked to. And all of this is really important. I'm sure our previous speakers talked about that. Unfortunately, I couldn't hear them. Can we go to the next slide, please? So technologies clearly play a key role in the everyday lives of older people. And I think we've seen this even more during the COVID pandemic, when all of us have been online with our parents and other older people that we want to talk to, and where it's been obvious that actually older people can and do use digital technologies. We also see, though, that there are policy discourses, for example, around ageing in place, that create a certain need for technologies, we might say. So if people are going to stay longer in their own homes, then they will need alarm pendants, they will need surveillance technologies to make sure they're okay, or to make sure that their family know they're okay. And of course, there's double-edged kind of debates around this. So alarm pendants and passive monitoring might make older people feel more safe in their home for sure, but they may also make them feel like they have a lack of privacy, or they don't want to share some of the data that's being collected about them. Another discourse that we see a lot is around active aging. So the fitness devices and trackers that are designed for older people to keep them active, even if really what they want to do is sit in an armchair and have a nice sleep, which is fine. I think what I'm trying to say here is that we've seen large-scale investments in gerund technologies, and this is a massive growth market. But I think we need to ask questions about who is doing the designing and what ideas of older people they use in this design. Okay, next slide, thanks. So I want to say a little bit about a research project called Tangible Memories that we were involved in at the University of Bristol, where we were actually trying to co-design social technologies. And if we can go to the next slide, this project was actually working in care settings. In this context, we have often seen that designers focus on the biomedical care of older people. And we've seen that new technologies that might improve the quality of life in the social and cultural lives of older people are often not considered in these technological designs. We felt through this project that there is huge potential and indeed almost imperative here to design social technologies that can improve the quality of life of older people living in care settings. And if we go to the next slide, Paul. So the Tangible Memories project was interdisciplinary and a cross-sectoral team. We worked with Alive Activities and Stand and Stare, who are artists, and Heidi Hinder. And we were trying to co-design innovative social technologies that would support democratic community building and well-being and quality of life in care homes. And our interest really was in the cultural and social potential of tools and technologies to support older adults to share stories, to curate and to represent their lives, using their own material lives or the objects that they had with them in their rooms as a resource. And on the project, we worked with 3 care settings, as you can see there. If we can go to the next slide. So we really did enter into a long co-design process over a period of 2 years, where our technologists and designers were working alongside Alive Activities staff, and you can see Tim Lloyd-Yates here that some of you will know and remember very fondly, I'm sure, in a long-term process where technology was barely visible, really. We had some prototypes such as you see in the photo here, which were very low cost and cobbled together to try and give people an idea of what we were thinking about. And we also did lots of different sessions around storytelling with older people. So we did We brought smells in and asked people to smell and tell us stories about the smell. We brought maps in and talked about maps and place. We asked people to bring objects along and talk about those objects as well. And through this, we were trying to learn what kind of technologies might support people to talk to each other and to talk to others within the care setting and beyond about the stories that they wanted to share. If we can go to the next slide, that would be great. So through this process, we noticed various things, and through ethnographic work as well. First of all, some relational and ethical issues that we found in care settings. So older residents themselves struggling to make meaningful connections with each other, care staff not always being able, because of time and other issues, or sometimes not comfortable to support conversations with residents, and also a lack of sort of connections with communities beyond care settings. And of course, we're seeing that even more now. We also noticed lots of emotional or affective issues for the older people themselves. So often they were living with loss of objects, actually. Those objects that were really important in their lives had maybe disappeared over the years and they no longer knew where they were. Also, of course, of relationships and of homes where objects on a mantelpiece might make sense, they might not make sense in a new setting. Embodied and material tensions were also obvious. So this sometimes related to the, I think we've gone on too quick, doesn't matter. The aesthetics of the care settings, the constant noise of the TV in some settings, and the noticed disconnect with the natural world and the world outside the care setting too. So I just want to quickly run through some of the technologies that we designed. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see the first of these. So the Tangible Memories app is available on the App Store and is currently being worked on as an Android app too. What the app does is enable you to make books that you can then go through a print and demand service to create a personalised book for a resident. And what's special about this is you can record up to 10 minutes of audio on each page of the book. So each page, it's really easy to use. You just click new page. You can take a photo and record up to 10 minutes of audio, which would be the older person talking about the story that they want to tell, for example. And then when you've finished making various pages and you're happy that you have a book, you can then send this to a print on demand service. And it comes back as an interactive book where you can actually listen to the audio of the older person talking about their stories. So I think this could be brilliant for families and care staff to use, particularly now when and if they're unable to see each other. You could imagine they could send a page as a kind of postcard, an audio postcard, to their families who are unable to see them, and vice versa. You could have audio postcards for the pages of Tangible Memories app going backwards and forwards. So if we can go to the next slide, Paul. So we also did quite a lot of experimentation with VR devices in care homes, and this was actually the first time we did this was back in 2013. So things have really developed with VR, and VR headsets are a lot cheaper now. I think the great thing about VR headsets is you can make bespoke content. So a family member could stitch together a 3D photo that you could then bring and show to an older person, for example, of a bluebell wood that they like to walk their dog, or maybe a home that they haven't been able to access for a while. But also there's free online content that you can also use. So you can see Bob in one of these photos who spent 20 minutes flying around the solar system when we introduced him to VR. And this reminded him of his time when he was a pilot in World War II. So there were multiple ways that encouraged Bob to start talking about different experiences in his life as well. If we can go to the next slide. I think I might be running out of time for these. So if we can go to the one after, I'm not sure how much time I have left. But I wanted to talk about the Parlours of Wonder, which was actually a follow-on project from Tangible Memories, because I think this illustrates really well how technologies and tools by themselves don't do anything. but it's when they're actually embedded into a culture or embedded into a context and into the practices within context that they can start to have a real influence on the way that people are interacting with each other. So the Powers of Wonder project really came out of a desire at the end of Tangible Memories to think about community connections beyond the care home as well as within the care home, and to think about connecting older people more with younger people as well. Or we might think that actually there is a great rhetoric around intergenerational tension at the moment that is becoming even more significant potentially through the COVID pandemic. And what we were trying to do was to bring younger and older people together to get to know each other, to talk to each other, to maybe raise some of those difficult issues that are going on between older and younger people, if indeed they are, because a lot of it could well be media hype. So what we did is we co-designed spaces in care homes where objects, maps, technologies, smells came together to try and create a different kind of environment in the care settings, and found that they worked pretty well to do that. What I think was also important that we also designed around this frameworks and tools to support that these to be taken on and embedded within the cultures of the care settings. So with the live activities and stand and stare, we produced both a care staff training toolkit for how they could run activities in the Powers of Wonder, and also a blueprint for care settings around how they could take these ideas on and create them in their own settings. So if we could go to my last slide, that would be great. Thanks, Paul. So I would say that the COVID pandemic has raised concerns around digital inequalities, and also I think around the potential and the social and cultural potential, particularly of digital technologies for older people. I think that we need to understand that ageing and technologies are co-constituted. So technologies for older people are partially shaped by ideas about ageing and how we view older people, but ageing is also being shaped by technology, and the everyday practices and everyday lives of older people are increasingly tied up with technologies and the way that they are using technologies. I think this idea of co-constitution suggests that we also need different approaches to research, to design, and to the development of technologies. For example, we need to explore technologies in everyday lives. We need to challenge stereotypical views of older people, of course, and we need to do co-design alongside older people to really understand what's usable and what's not usable for them, and how it fits into the practices and contexts of their everyday lives. So these meta design projects that consider technologies as just one part of a holistic approach is really important, and considering the practices and the context around the tools rather than just designing a technology, I think is vital. And I'm going to finish there, and apologies if it was garbled because it's been quite a stressful afternoon tech-wise.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Helen. Yeah, apologies for all the technological issues. So I think we're going to open it up now to questions. I can see the question on the screen sort of scrolling down. There's a few questions here. Can all the presenters, can you put your cameras on so we can see you and then direct questions at you? Brilliant. Okay, so I think the first question then is for Praminda and Alex. So this is from Andrea. So is there any research or development into using Alexa, telepresence robot, etc. with deaf and hard of hearing residents? Because the examples you gave were voice activated and replied via audio. Just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yes. Yeah, so I can answer some of that. We've done a bit of our own research with the use of robots, particularly one of the platforms that we use, the Pepper robot. And we found that because people rely quite a lot, particularly as you start to age, on lip reading, it becomes really quite hard to follow the speech. Where either there are no captions or you can't see the actual person speaking. With the telepresence robot, we've had one instance where it's actually been quite helpful that people have been able to sign across as well, and it's because the telepresence robot can move around a person who might be signing. It makes it easier for them to be able to see clearly and get a full picture. Alex, have you got something to add from your experience of what people have said about Alexa?
Yeah, so Alexa in particular is difficult, but they do have the versions with screens, so there is an option on that too. So I actually figured that out while I was working with someone, and they were like, I can't really always hear it. So we had an investigation kind of thing together and found that there is subtitles. We've also done work with other residents. So with the doorbell, for example, someone was saying, well, I wouldn't be able to hear that. So then we worked with them to create a linkage between that and the light bulbs, so smart light bulbs. So when their doorbell went, a light flashes, and the same could be done for Alexa. So if an alarm goes off, you could have a smart bulb flash a certain color, and that could be the signifier for you there.
And I think also to follow up on something Helen said, we are very cautious about using these technologies off the shelf because they weren't co-created for use with a demographic that might have a range of different aging related impairments. And I think it's really important to exercise caution, and there does need to be more research done, because I know a number of councils across the country have been giving out Alexas to people. And so if there is some research and evidence that we can put together which is what we intend to do from our project, to show for which groups this works, and more importantly what the problems are for some other groups, and that's really vital for us to do as a research community.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks both. I've exceeded my own brain capacity trying to do multiple tasks, so I'm trying to keep the track of the questions. So thanks for that answer. The next one is a bit of a long question. This is from Jenny Ann, and this is to everyone. Have you any results on how different subsections of the community, particularly protected characteristics, have embarrassed technology or rejected it? Have you any strategies for overcoming the challenges during lockdown while many older adults are still in it? We have seen isolation increase inclusion in our own independent older adult community. So it's a question around how it might sort of impact on different subsections of the community. Any thoughts on that?
Alex, I don't speak at is anyone answering that? I can take it. I think one of the things that has been mentioned before, Helen mentioned it, is around access to the technology and equity. We find not having access to good quality internet services, or living in a situation where the accommodation might be quite old and you can't get connectivity, and also the affordability of this technology are important issues to consider. Yeah, Alexi, we found certain villages still need to upgrade, and the cost of that, because it's a residential village, is on the residents. So to me, thinking about costs is one of the key issues which needs more thought.
Okay, Brilliant, thank you. And we got a whole range of questions here, so I don't think we'll get through all of them, but this is a question from Rob. Question for Alex. Was there any negative feedback about the trial use of Alexa?
Yeah, I've had, well, so it tended to be that people found a benefit for it. So a lot of it wasn't just like you're trialing a random device. We had a device library, so people would come to the innovation department and we would like discuss what their aspirations and needs were. So predominantly people were quite like willing to try these things, but I've had negative feedback from people that have seen it and they just like, I don't know why I want that. I've had several privacy concerns because obviously it's an always listening connected device. I've had people that say, you know, technical issues, that they can't get on board with it. One person wasn't able to throw their voice enough for that, so we tried to use a button for them to integrate that with. So it kind of limited the tasks it could do, but it meant that they could press the button and, you know, they get what's on today. But they still didn't really enjoy that because then it's just a speaking activity calendar, and that's not what they wanted. So yeah, those are kind of probably the main issues.
Okay, that's brilliant, thank you. So I've got a question now for Helen, actually. This is from Kay. With so many older people in care homes unable to meet their families in person, it would be wonderful to know that the learning and tools and the tangible memories and parlours of wonder work are being taken up by care providers. Is that happening?
Yes, intermittently, I suppose. I guess we know that some care settings we worked with have really taken on, well, they have the parlours of wonder there. They're being used for multiple things. So in an extra care facility we worked in, some of the residents go there every Friday night for a drink and a catch up. Probably not within COVID, but that's what they did do. I haven't heard of people using the app, but I know that our partners Stand and Stare, who are the interactive designers who came up with it, have a great blog post that is actually linked to on the slides about how it could be used during this time, during COVID, which relates to both recording the experience of older people during the pandemic, because it's actually a great way to record people's everyday lives, and it's really quick to do. And also, I guess that idea that I was talking about around postcards. I don't know, Kay, if people are using it, but if anyone on this webinar is, I would be delighted to know about it.
Well, there's actually a follow-up question from Kay as well. So this is for all presenters. Is it possible for organisations to hire equipment to trial with older people to get help, to help get over possible resistance, so that organisations can support older people to use technology now? So if and when there is another lockdown, they're more likely to engage. So any or all?
Well, I think that was kind of like the idea behind like our technology library, but I don't know that there are any services that are providing this immediately. We were fortunate that Extra Care were, you know, happy to be part of the project, and then we had funding to get equipment, and they are kind of extending it to other villages of theirs, so it's in their kind of corporate plan to include it in the wider community, and for other companies I've not heard of anything, unfortunately.
I think it's a great idea, Kay. We should try and do it. I know that even just buying a couple of iPads, all of the care settings that I've worked in have just bought a couple of iPads, which are not that expensive, but they're quite intuitive to use, and there's quite a lot you can do just with an iPad. So.
I just had a quick question. Like reconditioned tablets and things like that. Is that something that they're quite cheap, aren't they? And they're relatively safe. There's a question actually, not a question actually, a statement from Isabel Jones. After life, we have shared the tangible memories out on our social media and we'll continue to do so. So there you go.
Thanks, Izzy.
Okay, so let's think of another question. I've got a quick question actually while I'm trying to wade through some of the other ones. With the use of, say, VR technology, is that something, how likely is that going to be rolled out in the future? And also, is there issues with, say, people with neurological disorders like dementia, for example? What are the implications there, do you think?
So for me, yeah. So we did some experimentation with VR, and we mostly used stitched together photos. So there was like a 3D photo view, but the great thing about it was we could go, say, to the top of Cabot Tower in Bristol, which is great views over the city. So we could go up there in the morning, take a 3D stitched together photo of the view, and then go up to a care setting in the afternoon and say, here you go, we were up Cabot Tower this morning, look at the views. And there's some continuity there as well. And I think, again, you could get families involved in that to stitch together 3 photos, bring them up of favourite places that people might want to be reminded of. There are issues probably around, if you're going to play a game in a VR headset, there's potential issues around dizziness and those kind of issues. I guess it's you give things a go and you work up gradually with it and see what works and what doesn't. But for someone like Bob, I mean, he literally spent 20 minutes flying around the solar system, completely transported him. He had a great time while doing it. So I don't think we should should not use it just because it might not be suitable for everyone, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And then maybe people it's not suitable for. There's people my age it's not suitable for, or even Alex's age, I'm sure, who might get dizzy using a VR headset.
Okay, and there's a question here then from Judith. There are many older people who are digitally excluded, yet technology can bring such benefits. How can we help these people? Cost alone prevents many from fitting. And also the idea from someone else, Lisa, talked about the idea about using technology and adoption in minoritized groups. So I wonder if you could, anyone, or one or both of those questions.
I think from what Alex was telling me about his experience, or you can say more, you were saying, Alex, that people were recommending things to each other and that's why they were taking them on. So I think if we can have people being champions and talking about their own experience, that's really a good way to support other people getting started. Alex, do you want to say a bit more?
Sure. I think one of the things that I'd like to come out of this as an idea that kind of sticks around here and hopefully other places is they have a coffee morning here, but maybe once a month it's a technology one, and maybe sometimes they can invite someone to talk about different bits of technology to kind of like encourage it. And so an interview that I was doing the other day, they were saying how their neighbours bought one because they'd seen it, and through it they had like increased their terminology essentially of what these things can do, and then the neighbour gave them an idea about something that they didn't know it could do. So this kind of like group exploration that happens, and I think things like I mean we keep talking about Alexa, but I think it is one of the big key devices, because if they are illiterate, as long as it gets to like once the setup's done, it's kind of a restarter. Like they can find out a lot of information that they probably wouldn't have been able to do using a smartphone or a PC. So, you know, just asking it for information, like conversions and that kind of thing.
Can I come in as well? I think what doesn't work is setting up a classroom and saying you are now going to learn to be digitally literate. That really doesn't work. So it's really about finding a reason why people would want to use it. And it could be that maybe they have an interest and you say, well, you know, if you went online and had a look at that, or hey, you want to look at like where you used to live when you were growing up. Here you go. If we use Google, we can find, you know, the exact place and we can look at it and we can find some photos of it. So having a reason why you want to use technology is a really good sort of impetus to start to learn it, I think. I think we also need to recognise that maybe it's not always an imperative. Maybe you don't need to become digitally literate. Maybe you can live your life without it, and that's okay too. We don't all have to be digitally literate to live good lives, I guess. One thing that we did in communities in Bristol was set up a tech and chat cafe. So it was older people who we'd worked with as co-researchers who went along to a local cafe, advertised it really massively in the community, and were there just to offer technological support, but also a chat as well, if that's what people wanted. So it was a regular occurrence, and they got tech students from the local college down to sort of support that that intergenerational support through that as well. So yeah, it was that was a great sort of way of doing it, whilst also doing other stuff, like having a chat together as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Helen. I just had basically a quick question, and then we'll end on something a little bit more future oriented, possibly, sort of a little further into future. But a question from Jen was, Alexa, did you experience any issues with participants where they had difficulty understanding different accents, strong accents, that type of thing? So, thinking about the issues around discrimination. Was that a problem for any of your research?
I've not seen it completely fall apart with accents. It is pretty good because obviously they want to expand to every market possible, so that they are trying to. Yeah, there's one person that has quite a strong Jamaican accent, and to pick them up a really strong Bristolian accent, as you can probably expect might happen, and it was fine. I'd say the more likely thing that I found is that people have sometimes had difficulty understanding Alexa, because I think you can change the speed of it now, the response, but the initial response for some people, if it's giving a long, bunch of information, that has caused people problems to understand it the other way around.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So I think we'll end on a little bit more of a speculative question. So Stephen Moore has asked, so this is getting your crystal balls out. Where are we on the evolutionary IT timeline? Will tech be so immersed in our everyday lives that we almost won't notice it, and therefore we would be by default take it up just as a matter of course? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the next generation of older people have probably grown up with technology, so we won't be needing to have aging and technology webinars potentially in the future, or be embedded in people's lives. Of course, the way that we want to use technology will also change as people's understanding of it increases. The Alexa thing is interesting. My mother-in-law has Alexa. She has a very, very cross relationship with Alexa. She spends most of the time shouting at Alexa and telling it to shut up. So it's interesting how we see different technologies being used in you know, different older people's lives. But I definitely imagine that you know, we'll probably have lots of, well, we'll become cyborgs, no doubt, in the next 10 to 20 years with different kinds of augmentations on our bodies, and we won't think anything of it. I mean, my son's now 19. He is really excited about the idea of having chips embedded in him and all sorts. He is a geek, but you know, I'm sure that there's more of them out there.
Or maybe transhumanism is a topic for another webinar at some point in the future. Human 2.0. Any
experiment with it.
So we have 1 minute left. So I think as we've got 1 minute left, I just, unless anyone wants to sort of pick up on anything about the future facing question that we just had, just like to thank everyone really on behalf of the group for all your brilliant talks. It was fascinating to hear about your work. Thanks for everyone who's listening for all the questions that you've been posting in. I'll try to do my best to try to read, copy and paste and so on. So I know it's a little bit random. So hopefully most of you got your question asked. I'd also like to thank Paul Willis, who's been working continually behind the scenes to get this all sorted out with the IT. That's been great. And also keep an eye out for the next webinar. It's due on the 11th of November. It's going to be again in the afternoon. The topic will be this time around volunteering and volunteer support for older adults. And really hope you enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Hope you enjoy the next couple of months and enjoy the rest of the day. And look after yourself, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully in 2 months' time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.